In this video, I'm going to show you how you can set up and use the miniExtensions portal. The portal is a really great product where you can send a link to your users and they can log in and see the records that are related to them. So by default, each user will only see the records that they are linked to. This can be useful in a variety of situations. For example, a lot of people use it as sort of like a client login. Others use it as sort of like an internal tool where their employees log in. Um, and the nice thing about this is you don't need to add everybody to Airtable. Um, so, I mean, this is a way to save on your Airtable bill, but it's also a way to sort of limit access to people, right? So you can simply, give people access to the portal and to very specific things within the portal if you need to, and they won't be able to see anything else. And they don't have to have an Airtable account or any account for that matter. And it's very easy to set up and use. So I'm gonna just show you a quick example first. This video is probably going to be pretty long, but you, don't be alarmed. You don't have to stick around to the end. I'll cover the most important stuff at the beginning, and then I'll kind of go into a bit more into the weeds later on. So here's an example that I'm going to use. It's kind of like a ticket system, a very rudimentary example, obviously. So here we have a collection of tickets, with like an urgency and a status, and those tickets they're assigned to certain people. So we have three different, let's say, agents here, and then there's a bit of data in there, right? And we want to have a portal for this. So I have one that's already kind of set up, just to show you what that can look like, and then afterwards I'm going to show you how to set up your own, which is actually very easy. So this is an example of an already configured one. So at first you're presented with a login field. By default, right off the bat, this is just going to be the primary field in Airtable for a specific table that you need, that I'll explain in a second. But you can also add like a password field here, or you can have email with email verification, for example. This is a very popular feature where users would enter their email here, and then they get a one-time code sent to their email that they paste in here to actually log in. So that way you can be sure that the people logging in are actually who they say they are. But yeah, the other popular alternative would be like a username and password kind of setup. So anyway, so in this simple example, I'm just entering the name here and then hit continue, and that logs Emma in this case into the portal. So right now, I'm going to see every record. Well, I'm going to see the records that are related to Emma. Um, so you can see here, there's a couple. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we actually see those 5. And you can set up sort of different pre-made filters that are essentially kind of mirroring an Airtable view. So you can see, like for example, in this case, open tickets, and then if I select resolved, I'll only see the ones that are resolved. And I can have a look where it's all of them. And it's in each of those, by default, it's going to be still only the ones that are actually related um, to that user. And you can also have some summary fields here at the top. And there's a lot of functionality here that I might cover later on in the video. But let's cover the basic details first. So by default, this is sort of the default layout, which is a grid view. We also have other ones available, like a gallery or a list, or even a map, a chart, a calendar. So for Kanban, there's a lot of different options to display this data. By default, it's a grid because it's kind of the most commonly used one. And on the grid, you have the option to edit data straight on the grid, like kind of like what Airtable does. So for example, if I wanted to change the urgency of this task, I could simply, remove the existing one and set another one. And if I go to Airtable now, you can see it's already changed. So all these changes go straight to Airtable. We don't ever save any of the data. We basically just act as a middleman to yeah, transfer whatever you enter over to Airtable and then make those changes. So yeah, and then you can also set up certain fields to not be editable. So for example, this one I can edit and this one I can edit, but this one, I don't want my users to be able to edit this. So I can simply disable that. And then maybe this resolution field, I do want to allow them to edit that. All right, and there's also the option to simply open up the record. And that basically opens up a, a form as part of the portal. And again, you can decide which fields are going to be editable and which ones are not. So for example, like these are just read only. I can see the data, but I cannot interact with it. And other fields I can actually edit. And you can decide on both this form view and the grid which fields are visible and which fields are editable. So you can choose to hide fields that you don't need your users to see. And those that are actually visible, you can limit those in terms of their editability. Right, and then there's a lot more features here. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. For example, you can allow them to sort and filter. You can allow them to download a CSV file of their grid, which may be really useful. There's a search function, obviously. Another really cool feature is the profile feature. So in this like profile icon here, you get access to a user profile. And this can be super helpful if, for example, you want your users to update certain data about themselves. So say you have vendors logging in and you want them to be able to update, for example, their address or like a telephone number or a contact email address or something like that, or even their password that they use to log into this portal. You're able to present that in the user profile. In this case, it's very bare bones because the table I have set up doesn't have much information, but I can show a bit more complicated example um, later on as well. Yeah, so this is super powerful, very useful, so you don't have to deal with any of this. The users can just do everything themselves, basically. All right, so let me show you how you can set that up. Let's ignore this this ready-made example, and let's go to miniExtensions. So this is sort of the main dashboard. I've already selected this demo base. And if I just hit create to create a new extension, I can go to select the portal. And now comes the most important part, and that is selecting a users table. There is a help link here if you're only just getting started. The users table is the most important thing to make your portal work. The way this is set up, in my case, this is going to be the service desk users table. This table is used to store each user in a record. So you can see I have 3 possible users here for my portal, each with their own record. And then this users table links to the actual data tables. And that is how the connection is made. So in order to have the miniExtensions portal, you need a users table with linked record fields to the data tables that you actually want to present to your users. So for example, here I'm linking this to the tickets table, and then you can see in this tickets field, each of the tickets that are linked to this user are, they're linked in this field. And this is how the portal knows which records to display, basically. All right. And as I mentioned, there can also be a password field. So if you wanted your users to log in with an email and password, you could do that. And there's also no limit on how many users you can have. So if you have a lot of people that need access, you can add all the records in here, and by default, everybody will be able to log in with the details that you require them. But you can also set it up so that, for example, not everybody in this table can log in. Um, maybe you want only, maybe you have one table with a ton of different people in them, and not everybody should be able to access that portal. There are ways to limit that as well. But by default, everybody in the users table, in theory, has access. All right. And there can also be fields in this user table that's not even used for the portal itself. Um, so yeah, there can be like unrelated fields as well that, with additional information that you don't really need for the portal. That's maybe just internal to you or something like that. All right, so that's the users table, and you need to set that here. So in my case, it's service test users. You can just start typing, and it searches it automatically. And then under tables, you can select the tables that you want to display to your users. And as I mentioned, this is basically this is based on the linked record fields in that users table. So if you're not seeing a table here, that means you don't have a linked record field pointing to that table in the users table. So in my case, I have this tickets field here, and this is what you're seeing in this list here. So if I added another one, I would see a second option here, and I could select multiple. Um, so you're not limited in the number of tables that you can add. If your users need access to several different tables, you can absolutely do that too. And you can add them later on as well. So this is not final. The only thing that is final is the users table, which is why you need to get that right. Everything else you can change after the fact. For example, the view type, as I said, by default is grid, but you can also select any of these other ones. But this can also just be changed later. So if I just hit create now, all right, that creates our portal. And basically, the way this is set up, you can already use it. So by default, the way this is designed, it's designed to work basically right out the box. So if I just pull this up here, I logged into the same user. If I compare this to my other example, this is going to look pretty similar, right? So there's a few details that you can change after the fact, but the general, setup is good to go right out the box. But now comes the part where you can sort of customize how things work. So the first thing you might want to customize is how your users log in. So that can be done through the users table and login section here. So by default, as I said, it's just going to be the primary field of your users table, which is the name in this case. But if you already saw, I have a password field in this users table, so I can select that as a second login field. So I just click on it, and you can see the check marks here. And you can also, if it's a password, you can click on the actual field itself, and then you can select it so it's masked as a password. So that way the raw text that people enter isn't visible. It's kind of like your standard password field online, where it's just kind of masked to hide the input basically. All right, and if I just refresh this page here, anytime you make changes to the login fields, all your users are going to get logged out. But if you don't make changes, your users are going to stay logged in. So they don't have to log in every single time, unless you make changes to how people log in, and then they would have to. So now if I just enter a name, I can't even click continue. And if I enter a wrong password, I just typed in a 1, it's going to give me an error because that's not the right one. And if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, which was the password that was set here, I can log in now. Oh, well, it's part of a data breach. Well, don't set your passwords to 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of how this works. Really straightforward. Yeah, for the login, and there's a lot more functionality here. that we can discover. As I mentioned, you can do like an email verification. If one of your login fields is an email address, you can click on it and then turn on email verification, and that's that one-time code that I mentioned. But there's other options here too. You can scan a barcode, and you can also allow your users to select the existing values in the table. So that basically just gives them kind of like a way to just search and select from the records. Um, so depending on your use case, all these functions kind of make sense, but they might not make sense for everybody. But there's a range of different options here that you can choose from. All right. Um, there's other options like deciding what happens if a record does not exist. You can automatically create a new record for the user, or you can use um, a, a redirect. For example, you could redirect them to a sign-up form. That could be a miniExtensions form that creates a new record in your users table, and that way they could sign up for the portal basically, and then you can have certain fields that they're required to enter, etc., and that creates um, their record. So there's you can create a whole system here, which is actually really cool. Um, then this feature here, that's the one that I mentioned earlier, where you can limit which records in your users table are actually allowed to log in. So if you turn this on, you can add conditions. And for example, you could say like, oh, if this checkbox is not ticked, they're not allowed to log into the portal. So even if they enter the correct name and password, they wouldn't be allowed in. So this is actually really useful to sort of, for example, deactivate users. Maybe you don't want to delete them altogether, but you might just want to deactivate them. You can have a checkbox field or a single select or whatever you want really, um, and just say like, hey, okay, if this is checked or not checked, I'm not letting them in. This is a really cool way to kind of manage access. There's also a last login time. If you want to keep that, you can select a date and time field here. And that kind of keeps track of when they last used the portal. And this is a cool function here, the login formula, which gives you a formula that you can copy here and then paste into a formula field in your users table. And that gives you a unique link for each user where they would click on that link and be logged into straight to the portal without ever even seeing the login screen. So this is kind of cool if, for example, you send your users like a kind of like a sign up confirmation email or something like that. You could include that link, and they wouldn't have to worry about the actual login page. They would just go straight to the portal. So that's kind of a neat feature. All right, so there's a lot more options here to discover. There's a lot of customizability. You can change like some of this stuff about the login page. You can change how the portal header is presented. So that would be like this part up here. You can include a logo there, for example, or you could even include HTML. So if you set this to Airtable field, you can select a formula field that is then interpreted as HTML. On that's obviously super powerful if you're familiar with that. And here you can also edit which fields are available and editable in that profile that I showed you earlier, where users can see their data basically. So for example, in this case, I would probably want to get rid of this tickets field because I wouldn't want them to be able to unassign or assign tickets to themselves. But I might want to show like the name and leave that as editable and the password and let them edit that as well. And you could have more fields here, like like an address or phone number or stuff like that, that they could edit. Yeah. So now, for example, if I refresh this and then go to the profile, you'll see that now I have the name and the password, and then just the other fields are just kind of, in this case, just for information. But I don't see that tickets field anymore. All right. So then by default, you'll notice that you cannot edit anything on the grid. Um, so why don't we just go ahead and change that? Because that's going to be a pretty useful function for a lot of people. So by default, you'll only be able to edit stuff by actually opening um, the records with that form. And by default, all fields are going to be editable, so you're going to need to change that anyway. So let's have a look at that. We'll kind of skip over the other stuff here because they're not as commonly used, but there's a lot more functionality here. For example, the security one, if you wanted a separate password to even get to the login page for some reason, you could do that here. There's some styling options and other stuff. But let's get actually into the table settings themselves because that's where a lot of the power actually lies. So if I just click on the table name, I'm presented with this setup screen, and this is really where the bulk of the customization really happens. Okay, so for example, what I just mentioned, having your users be able to edit on the grid itself, that would be under the user actions. So user actions is everything that the user can do on the portal. You can turn on or off. By default, almost everything is turned on here. So the search bar is turned on, the sort button, download a CSV. You can let them hide fields, basically. They can copy text on the grid. There's a filter button, and you get these drop-down filters. And by default, you'll see all the single and multi-select fields in your table, like in that data table, which is the tickets table in this case. You'll see all of them added by default, but you can get rid of them if you don't want some of them, but maybe want others, or you could just turn it off altogether. So these drop-down filters, they are presented like this, and they're just a really quick and easy way for users to filter records. So for example, if I only wanted to see the high urgency ones, I just click on that, and then the view refreshes, and I'll only see that. So this is just a really, really quick filter, basically, whereas the normal filter options is a little bit is more advanced, but also a little bit more complicated to use. So that's why we're turning the drop-down filters on by default because they're quite useful. But yeah, if you don't want that, you can turn it off. And here's also where you would turn on inline editing. So that's where users can edit stuff straight from the grid without opening up a record. There's a couple of things to keep in mind here, and that's also like in this explainer here. Um, for example, if you're using this like that pop-up form basically, where you open up the full record, um, you can have field validation where your users are only allowed to submit a form if certain conditions are met. So if certain fields are set to specific values, etc. This is not going to be checked during inline editing, at least at the time of filming this. Um, if you're watching this, later on, you might see like a slightly different note here. Maybe we've made some changes, but at the moment, this is a limitation where this field validation is not applied during inline editing. And also, if you're on that form that pops up, if you're only showing some of those fields conditionally, so under certain conditions, those fields are displayed to the user, those fields will also not be editable in line um, because on the grid, they'll always all be visible. But then, yeah, if they might be hidden, we're just disabling that functionality. So you at least won't be able to edit them. All right, so yeah, with this turned on, you could now edit stuff from the grid. And then there's more options here, like you can change the title that's presented to your user. So if you don't want them to see the actual table title in Airtable, you could change the title here, and that's what they'll see. You can add a description with a bunch of formatting options. Here you can decide whether or not you want them to be able to create new records. So in this case, for example, with this ticketing system, I probably want to turn this off because I don't want them to create new records. But in your scenario, that might be a valid option. So you can choose to allow this or not. By default, it's turned on, but you can turn this off easily. All right. And then here is one place where you can edit this, the form that is displayed to the user when they open it up. And by default, this is also what determines the fields that are visible on the grid. You can sort of show different fields in this pop-up form compared to the grid, but by default, they're connected to each other. So yeah, so basically, if I remove stuff here, for example, this one I don't need here, I'll probably also remove this assign to field because, well, that's our users table field, so that's just going to be the same value for everybody. And then maybe I want to, maybe I want to drag stuff around a bit. I can do that, and then when I refresh the page here, you'll see that so the order is different now, that extra field is gone. And also because I've turned off create new, that create new button that was here before is now also gone. And I can also edit inline now. So now I can edit this status field. But you can also see right now I can also edit this and this. And that's because on this form, everything except for the ID is editable. You see fields that are not editable have this read-only text on them. So for example, if I don't want my users to be able to change this username, I can click on it and then turn on read-only. And then I can switch between the fields with these little arrows here. So if I go to the next one, user email, turn on read-only. Resolution, I'd probably want to leave. If I just go back, I mean, yeah, the description, I might want to turn on read-only as well. And inside each field, you also have some more options as well. But that's probably a bit too much for this video now. Okay, so now if I refresh this page again, you'll see that I'm still able to, excuse me, I'm still able to edit some of these fields, but not the fields that are just set to read-only. So now I can click on that, I can copy stuff, but I'm not able to actually type in it or do any modifications. And the other ones I can still edit. So I could still type in here. All right. So that's kind of some of the most important stuff for now. One more feature that I really want to point out is this conditional tables feature. That's a fairly new addition to the portal that is extremely powerful. So with this feature, you can show different tables to different types of users. So for example, you might have a you might have some kind of like admin user privilege where they can see all the tables in your portal. But then to normal users, say you have users from different departments, for example, you might only want to show, maybe user from group A gets to see a certain table, user from group B gets to see a different set of tables. And you can do that with these conditional table settings. So you can add conditions here. And like a common use case would be kind of like a single select maybe, where your users can then, where you can decide, hey, only users in this department can see this table, for example. So that would be, that's a really powerful feature. And then going back to the views, which is kind of the, where a lot of the customization happens. This is where you can change the default view type for this table. So if you want a different presentation of your data, you can do that here. And this is where you could also change which fields are visible in the grid specifically. So as I mentioned, the grid and this pop-up subform by default show the same fields, but if you want them to show different fields, you will just need to add them here. So I'm just going to show you an example of this. So if I only add, say, description urgency here and refresh this page, I'll only see those two fields, well, and the primary field, which is the ID on the grid. So you can see all the other ones are gone. But if I open this up now, I'll still see the other ones as well. So this is a great way, for example, if you have a lot of fields, You might want to limit what's shown on the grid, but maybe you want to show more fields when they actually open up a record. So this is quite useful. As I said, by default, they're linked together, but they can easily be decoupled by just adding fields here in this default fields category section. And then last but not least, we have this views setting where you can add these like predetermined filters that I showed in the first example. So by default, you're only going to see one view here, and if you only have one of them, you're not going to see these buttons here. It's only when you add several that's when you start to see those buttons. And you can click on them and customize how they're set up basically. These views can also be conditional, so you might, within the same table, show certain views to certain types of users. So again, like maybe like an admin could see a different view, because you can filter these views in a different way. So by default, it'll only show the records linked to the logged in user, but you could have a view that shows all the records in that table, regardless of whether or not they're linked to the user. So that would be like a classic example of like, you have an admin view that shows all the records, but that one's conditional, so only admins can see it. And for the views, if you want to filter them, you would just select a specific Airtable view, and that would apply that view's filter and sort to what's displayed in the portal. So basically, it's what you see in Airtable is what you're going to see on the portal as well. You can give it a custom label if you like. By default, it's just going to use the name of the view itself. Yeah, and then you can also set it to have a different kind of view. So by default, it's just going to take these default settings here. But if you want in a certain view, maybe you want maybe different fields to be visible. Again, coming back to that admin view example, maybe you want to show more fields to certain types of users in a conditional view. You can do that here, or you can change to a completely different view type. There's a lot of options here, but we're already at like half an hour, so I'm gonna think I'm gonna end this here. This should be a rundown of the most important features of the portal, how you can set that up, and how you can try everything out. But there's more to discover here. If you ever have any questions with this or need any help setting this up, we're always available. You can just click on this blue chat icon in the bottom right corner, and yeah, we're always happy to help.